Welcome back to my channel. In this video, we're covering the Florida State Seminoles. Last year was an improvement for Florida State. They hired Mark Novell in 2020 after going through the bad Willie Taggart years. Willie Taggart was by far the worst, probably is the worst head coach in Florida State history. So when Mike Novell came in, he had a big mess to clean up. Uh, Hydration issues were a problem at Florida State under Willie Taggart. He had to bring in a whole new staff because the staff at Florida State under Willie Taggart was undermanned. There were just a lot of cultural changes that Mike Novell had to make in Tallahassee, and it was not going to be a 1 year transition and then boom, all of a sudden Florida State's back to what they were in 2022. This was going to be a process that Florida State fans were going to have to endure, and they did that. The first 13 games of excuse me the first 13 games of Mike Novell's career, they were 3-10. They were 3-6 in 2020, and the only reason why they didn't have a couple more losses onto that is because they had to forfeit. They had to uh, back out of games against Clemson and Wake Forest because of COVID, and they didn't have enough players eligible to play. It's 3-6 his first year. Then they started off 0-4, including a loss to an FCS school in Jacksonville State. Um, they were 3-10 in their first 13 games under Mike Gravel. They did not look good, but ever since that 0-4 start in 2021, Florida State has been 15-6 in their last 21 games under Mike Norvell. Big improvement, big change of momentum for the program, uh, big confidence booster for the players at that program. They've been 15-6 since then. Last year they had their best year since 2016, 10 wins, bowl victory, and they for the first time since 2016 they swept both their in-state rivals Miami and Florida last year. So here are their schedules from last year, 2022. They dominated Duquesne. They beat LSU in what was one of the craziest endings I've ever seen to a college football game. It was very, 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 very crazy towards the end. Florida State was leading big. LSU started them out a comeback, but when they tried to kick an extra point to go into overtime, a Florida State player blocked it. It was one of the craziest endings I've ever seen to a football game, bar none. They had a bye week the very next week because they played a week zero game, which was Duquesne. But so they were awarded a second bye week for that. They beat Louisville in what was a closely contested matchup. Florida State had to handle adversity in the sense that they had a quarterback injury change. Jordan Travis was out, which Jordan Travis has gotten better in his career, but durability has always been a problem of his. Uh, those are just the facts. He's always had a problem with staying healthy. He's never had a full year where he didn't get nicked and hurt badly at least once. So, but hey, he's a tough guy, and you see it when you watch him play. Louisville loses to Florida State. Florida State dominates Boston College. Not really surprising. I talked about in a few other ACC videos I've done covering some ACC teams. I believe it was Miami and Georgia Tech that I talked about this. Boston College is just a bad program under their current head coach. So Florida State dominated them easily. And then things got a little murky for Florida State because they were going on a 3-game losing streak against Wake Forest, NC State, and Clemson. Now, this is a legitimate criticism about Florida State's season last year. They were better than what they were. There's no doubt about it. But in their losses against respectable competition, Wake Forest, NC State, and Clemson, they lost all three of those games back to back. And the Clemson Tiger, that scoreboard for Clemson for the Clemson game, don't let the scoreboard fool you. I watched that game. Clemson, for the most part, was blowing out Florida State, but then Florida State in garbage time got a few late touchdowns to make the score look a little bit more respectable. Then they had their second bye week, which was virtually their week zero game. They played against Georgia Tech, blew them out. Georgia Tech, I covered in my Georgia Tech video, fired their head coach, Jeff Collins, had Brent Key as their head coach, interim coach. They got a little bit better under Brent Key, but it's still a 5-7 year for Georgia Tech. They've been a bad program for a long time. Miami was absolutely terrible last year, and Florida State. I never thought I would say this. They made Miami quit. The Hurricanes team looked like they had quit. They were just as soon as Florida State went up by a couple touchdowns, it was like the Hurricane players just waved the flag. wave the white flag, and that's a terrible thing to say about a Miami football team. Florida State just made them they made them look unprepared. They made them look inept. They made them look just incompetent in every sense of the game. And they beat Miami by 42 points, which is ironic because 2 years earlier, the previous time Florida State was on the road in Miami, Miami beat Florida State by 42 points. 2 years later, Florida State flips the script and beats them by 42 points. Very next week, they dominate Syracuse. They dominate Louisiana right after that, and then they had a surprisingly close victory over Florida. Florida, my Gators, who were a bad team last year, gave Florida State a run for their money, gave Florida State probably the toughest victory that they had, and that can only be debated by LSU and the team you see at the bottom of the screen, Oklahoma. But Florida gave FSU a run for their money, but Florida State at the end of the day won to go 9-3, which was more than their previous 2 seasons combined. The previous 2 seasons combined, they won 8 games, and this year they had won 9, which became 10 because they won a close victory against the Oklahoma Sooners in the Cheez-It Bowl. Uh, Oklahoma was leading Florida State for a good portion of that game, but Florida State mounted a good comeback and finished their year strong, 10-3 record. And Florida State arguably got better after their roster got better afterwards because they had some very nice transfer portal additions, including this big tall receiver from Michigan State, in addition to all the returning players that they had from this past year. So Florida State fans are looking for possibly an ACC championship visit, and I can't really say that I blame them, but in order to do that, they have to do better than what they did last year. And here's their schedule right here. They have LSU right out the gate. I think LSU wins that game because it's a rematch. I think their offense will look better, being that it's the second year under Brian Kelly. Brian Kelly is a future Hall of Fame college football coach. He's won at Cincinnati, won at Notre Dame, and last year in their very first season, he won an SEC West title. When was the last time LSU had a head coach to take them to an SEC title game in his very first year? Um, I really respect Brian Kelly's coaching resume and his coaching skills. May not necessarily be the most likable guy, but he is good at what he does. And this will be a rematch of last year. Year, I already talked about how crazy the ending was between Florida State and LSU, and I think that's going to be a motivation factor for LSU to kind of, you know, right that wrong and get that victory back. Then the very next week, I have LSU winning that game. The very next week, they got Southern Miss. I don't see a reason why Florida State could lose to Southern Miss. They're on the road at Boston College the next week. Florida State's going to blow out Boston College. Then they're on the road at Clemson, and this is that big momentum swing game for Florida State. If they can go on the road and beat Clemson, then that signifies that Florida State might just be the new king of the ACC. But you have to remember, there's no division format in the ACC for the next 4 seasons. So Florida State could beat Clemson or vice versa, and then they meet again in the ACC title game. So there's a possibility that these two teams can meet each other twice. There is no Atlantic or Coastal division in 2023, 24, 25, or 26. These next 4 years will have no division format. It will just be the two best teams in the conference, and they're going to compete against each other for the ACC title. So on the road at Clemson, I just don't think Florida State can beat Clemson, especially on the road. So 2-2 start for Florida State, but then they come off their bye week. They're going to get Virginia Tech. I think that's a win for them. They're going to get Syracuse the very next week, another win. The Duke Blue Devils, another win. But I will not sleep on Duke. They had a very good first year last year under their head coach Mike Elko, who was the former defense coordinator at Texas A&M. He had them 9-4 year, had a 9-4 year, which for Duke and for a first year coach at Duke, that's some damn good coaching right there. So if you're a Florida State fan, I would recommend you not sleep on the Duke game. It might give you tougher game that you might think. Then they're on the road at Wake Forest the very next week. Wake Forest is going to be in a little bit of a transition because they no longer have Sam Hartman, who was one of the best quarterbacks in the ACC the last couple of years. He transferred up to Notre Dame, And because of that, I think Florida State will win. No Sam Hartman. That means the offense is not going to be as prolific as it normally was the last couple of seasons. After Wake Forest, they're going to be on the road at Pitt. Pat Narduzzi is a pretty good coach. Gave Pitt an ACC title a couple of years ago. Excuse me, water break. Sorry if you heard that. On the road at Pitt, Pat Narduzzi always has a solid, fundamentally coached well team in Pitt. Won the ACC a couple of years ago. Had an 8-4 season a year ago. I don't think Florida State will go on the road and lose at Pitt. Then the very next week, it's the biggest game of the year for both Miami and Florida State as they play each other. And this is one of the best rivalries in college football. I said that this is one of the best rivalries in college football in my Miami video. I think I had in the top 7 in terms of college football rivalries. Um, the history of great players and great coaches that come out of both sides of this rivalry is listen to who's who's. Florida State, you have Jameis Winston, Anquan Bolden, Charlie Ward, Ward Dunn, Derek Brooks, Deion Sanders, Jalen Ramsey, Chris Winkie, uh, Dalvin Cook. You know, you go to Miami, Michael Irvin, Warren Sapp, uh, Ray Lewis, Ed Reed. You know, you have Frank Gore, Frank Gore and Andre Johnson and Sean Taylor. It's just great players on both sides of the program, on both teams historically. And in the 90s between Florida State and Miami, uh, they were always competing against each other in the top 10. And in this rivalry, no, there's not a rivalry in college football that is more synonymous with missed field goals than this rivalry right here between Florida State and Miami, because there was a stretch where Florida State would lose to Miami almost annually by missed field goals, whether it be wide right or wide left. And the the ending of these games is always climatic. It wasn't climatic last year, but these two teams always put on a great show, no matter how bad or good each team is. There's always fireworks whenever they play each other. In college football, you can kind of get away with record play when rivalries are played when rivals play against each other. You know, you saw that in 2021 with Auburn and Alabama. Uh, Auburn was a bad team in 2021. Alabama was a team that went on to win the ACC, but that game they played against each other was one of the most tightly contested Iron Bowl matchups you'll see, certainly in the modern era. And that could always be the same thing with Florida State and Miami. But I have Florida State beating Miami. Uh, I will say Miami will be much better than what they were last year. If you saw my video that I covered on Miami, I said they were going to go 8-4. I don't see Mario Cristobal coach football team having back-to-back bad seasons like he did last year. And then after the Miami game, they'll face North Alabama. That should be another win. Then they're on the road to face my Gators. I love my Gators, but I don't think they're at the level right now that they could beat Florida State, both talent-wise and in terms of coaching structure. I think Napier needs a few more years to collect some talent and set in the foundation that he wants at Florida before he can challenge some of the upper echelon teams in the SEC and in college football in general. So 10-2 record. That's why I have them Florida State with their losses coming up against LSU and then Clemson about 3 weeks later. So that's my record prediction for